Hello, WCA. It is the great Amori. We have a little update from the 12 p.m. 2 p.m. class, week 6, fall 2018. We had a really cool lesson Sunday. We looked at this pawn structure first, and I remember telling you that it is just the skeleton of the position that was played in a real game. And what I mean by that is if you look at the way the pawn structure is shaped, it reminds me personally of, say, a dinosaur skeleton in a museum. And the structure of any chess position gives tons of clues where your pieces should and should not go. I mean, very often, right? Let me give you an example of that by, well, why don't you stop and think for a second of where a typical square for a white knight might be in this position. So stop your video and think about a couple of places you might want to have a white knight. Okay, did any of you birds find the E5 square? And why are we picking E5? Because some of you, I remember in class, might say, well, I want to put the knight on D6 to attack the king and double attack the F pawn. But you have to remember this structure that I'm showing you came from a real game. So if it's a real game, chances are you may not be able to get into D6 because there could be a bishop or a knight protecting that square. So why the E5 square? Well, a couple of reasons. One, it's supported by one of your pawns. You guys see that, right? Number two, the knight is sitting on a half open file. And again, this is just an example of what could happen in a game because the discussion came from when students ask, well, once the opening is over, what am I supposed to do? Well, there's several things. One of them is improve a piece. And you might say, how do I improve a piece? Read the pawn structure. If you have a pawn on D4 and there's something of a hole here on E5, put the knight in there at some point. It's really a strong square. Of course, Black has the opportunity to play a move like F6, kicking the knight away, and we discussed this as well. That could be true, but let's look at what would happen if this move F6 was played in a real game. Okay. What if we had the setup like this? Now, isn't it very possible if you had this setup that White would have a rook on E1? Well, that would be an improving move as well. Now, you'd ask why. Because if White castles, the rook would be on F1, at some point you're going to think how to improve the position for the rook. Well, why not put it on a half-open file? The problem with pawn F6 now is when White removes the knight, let's say you put the knight back here. Oh, it's not going to let me move it back there. But if I could, you would see that by moving the knight, the rook would be coming right up the board. You guys see that? And attacking the pawn. I just figured out how to move the knight, how to make it White's turn. Anyway, you see what I just did there? Once the knight moves away, what happened to the rook? It's putting a lot of pressure on that E-pawn. This F-pawn can't go backwards. Oh, really? Pawns don't go backwards. Don't forget that. Okay, let's go back to the original position. Okay, here it is, except with one addition. I put one of the pointy guys on the board, a bishop on F4. Isn't that like a very natural square for that bishop to be? Look at that gorgeous diagonal. Okay, so, why are we spending time doing this? Just to teach you how to read pawn structure. It's really going to help you when it comes time to improve a piece, where the pawn breaks are. Here it's kind of funny for the pawn breaks because we don't have any pawn wedges. There are no pawns bumping heads, so it's not 100% clear how to break with the pawns. You'll see that Black has really, really good control of the D5 square, so White's probably not going to push that through anytime soon. And you see that this bishop, yeah, this is really strong, but the bishop does not control the D5 square. So pushing that pawn through is going to be a tough thing to do. You're going to need help from another pawn most likely. Okay, let's flip the board for a moment and look at this from Black's perspective. If you are playing Black, without me taking the white squared bishop off the board, where would you put your pieces? Let's assume you have a queen and knight and bishop, etc. Where would you put them? How about putting a knight on this square? Putting a beautiful black knight right on that square. Let's see if we can do that. I'll tell you, it's amazing I'm getting so good at this. Okay, so here we're looking at it from black's perspective. Beautiful square. Look at that knight. Absolutely incredible. Do you have any idea why there might be a rook on d8? I think you do. Isn't this a half-open file? That's correct. That's why teachers, coaches, elephants, they all tell you the same thing. Put the rooks on open files, half-open files. Put the knights on squares that are secured by pawns. Put the bishop on a diagonal where it controls lots of squares. Does it mean you always do these things? Of course not. We're chess players. We're masters at breaking the rules. You know, we can't break the rule like you can't suddenly move a knight like a bishop. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about bringing your queen out early, putting a knight on the side of the board. You have to figure out when it's time to break those rules or stick to those rules. Okay, let's say black is not happy with that knight on that square. And I know that the knight is attacking the bishop, so just pretend the knight can't take it. If you kick the knight away, and let's say, you know, we move somewhere, I know there's a free bishop here, but I'm not going to take it. I'm going to move away. Do you see what happened to this pawn? The same thing that happened in the other example. All of a sudden, the rook is putting a lot of pressure there. Okay, let me just back it up for a minute. If you wanted to protect this bishop and you just, you moved it away somewhere, that's great, but then this knight is going to stay in the middle of the board. And all of a sudden, you'll really learn why masters improve the pieces and how they improve the pieces. So let's put this stuff together and show the very, very quick game that we demonstrated in class. So we looked at a game that came from the center counter defense. And if you have time, check out the 4 o'clock video this week. We'll show you a really cool move that white played in this position. But the one that we did in class was pawn to d4. And then we explained why pawn to c6 was played. This pawn move here, hopefully this mouse cursor is showing up, is designed to do a couple of things. One, it slows down the push of the d pawn for white, but also from experience, a lot of players with black, they get hit with this bishop move here to d2. And if I put it there now, you'll see that if this knight ever moves, that the queen now has a retreat square back into their own camp. And again, being that we have 2 weeks off, I recommend you watch the 4 o'clock video. You'll see how some of these ideas connect, okay? So after the move c6, white didn't go after the queen right away and just brought the knight out to f3. The knight gets pinned. There's no danger right now of the bishop taking. You just take back with your queen. So white decided to develop the dark squared bishop. Based on the pawn structure, where would you put it? Of course, Luca, excellent. Bishop f4. Why not? What a gorgeous diagonal. Black played pawn to e6. And here, white decided to ask the bishop a question. And that's exactly what the writers in chess and the video authors, that's what they call it. Asking the bishop a question with the h-pawn. Hey man, what are you doing? You want to sit there or do you want to take me? The bishop decided to take. We take with the queen, and then black pins the knight on c3. White wants to castle, possibly kingside, but if you put the bishop on d3 right away, you have to be careful because there's a battery attacking this knight twice. So if you don't want to worry about the tactics, you put the bishop on e2. I had one student in the class say, well, what happens if the bishop takes the knight? Should we trade queens? Me personally, and I've actually asked other strong players about this position, and most people agreed that we would take with the pawn because we don't want to trade queens here. We have a nice lead in development. We have 2 minor pieces out, and we have 2 of these pointy guys, 2 bishops. Look carefully at black's position. They have 2 knights, but they do not have a dark squared bishop. The combination of your queen and dark squared bishop should almost guarantee you some advantage on the dark squares for the middle game. Do you have any disadvantage? Well, you do have these doubled c-pawns, but right now black is in no position to take advantage of that, number one. And number two, are they really that weak? Because they are controlling a lot of squares toward the center of the board. So me personally, if you chopped off my knight, I'm taking with the pawn. But black didn't do that. They developed their knight, getting ready to castle. White attacks the bishop, and black castles thinking that white can't take the bishop because there's a nasty pin here. So black castles. And what does white do? They take the bishop. If you are doing the Susan Polgar books, and I've actually had a couple of kids complete them, and I need to put them in the blog because one of them actually completed them last July. Annika did all 5 books in like, I don't know, a month and a half or a month or something. It was crazy. She did an incredible job. If you're doing that book, you can go to book 4, and I think it's on the 2nd page. You'll see the exact same checkmate. What? You're giving me a rook? What? You're giving me another rook? No, you can't do that because it's checkmate in 2 moves. Pause the video, find it, and then have a great Thanksgiving. I'm not even going to show it to you. I'm going to end the video right here. Find the checkmate for white, and then enjoy your Thanksgiving. This is the Great Amore. You guys are the best.